It is Election Day in America. Thank you for being with us this morning. Now, after a final push for votes, it's time for your voice to be heard, and the stakes could not be higher.
With Democrats holding a slight edge in the House and with a 50-50 split in the Senate, control of Congress is up for grabs. Leading candidates and party heavyweights spent the last full day of campaigning yesterday in a last-minute blitz to get out the vote. A new NBC News poll shows Democrats have pulled even with Republicans when it comes to voter interest. 73% of respondents from both parties say they are eager to cast their ballots. Republicans had a 9-point enthusiasm advantage just a month ago. And with razor-thin contests from coast to coast, it's all going to come down to turnout. We have team coverage following all the key races and developments for you this morning. NBC News correspondent Lindsay Reiser is tracking the race for governor in New York. Spotlight PA government reporter Kate Huanpu is following the races in Pennsylvania. But we are going to start with NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray, who's on set here with us. He doesn't know this yet, but we have super glued him to that chair.
Yeah, basically, yeah. We promised yesterday.
Let me out, let me out. Yeah, exactly. So you'll be saying that in about 24 hours. All right, so we've been talking about this early turnout. Nearly 45 million ballots cast so far nationwide early, far more than we saw in 2018. Does that benefit one party more than another? And then what can we expect as far as actual turnout today at the polls?
We are bracing for unprecedented midterm turnout. Voters are fired up. And yes, we have actually seen more early vote that we've actually had for a previous midterm election. Not quite the 2020 level, but of course that's a presidential contest. And disproportionately, the early voters are Democratic voters. Election day voters are disproportionately Republicans. And how that yin and yang kind of comes out. There are going to be some states that we're going to find out they're going to release the early vote first. There's some states that actually release the election day first. And so you're going to have to go through Chuck Todd, Steve Kornacki, and the great people at our decision desk to kind of wave through the different tranches of data that we're going to see throughout election night.
Also, sort of in the same vein, when we talk about this potential for showing up, Joe mentions enthusiasm, how it seems to have sort of leveled out after Republicans had this advantage. You know, the party in the White House often has an uphill battle, but we have seen this spike in Democratic enthusiasm. What does that mean you're looking out for in terms of those numbers there?
Yeah, Savannah, potential uncertainty. I mean, those of us who've covered midterm races in the past kind of expect this, like, well, this is not going to be a great Democratic year. The president's approval rating is at 44%. People think the country's headed in the wrong direction. But as you ended up mentioning, we do see that spike in Democratic enthusiasm. And even in the 2018 midterms, which was a really good year for Democrats, Republicans held their own with the polarization. You saw them fired up just as well. And so that polarization where everybody's kind of in their camps, you normally don't have the big red waves or blue waves we've seen in past midterm cycles when the party in power is just as fired up as the opposition is.
So when it comes to control of Congress, specifically control of the Senate, there are these major battlegrounds we're following. Top of mind, you've got Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada. Maybe those are the big three. Also keeping an eye on Ohio and Arizona. This time tomorrow, or maybe even Thursday, what do you think could be the state that we are looking at that could actually determine who controls the Senate?
I think Pennsylvania, and it might take us a few days to kind of settle who ends up winning that contest. But for Democrats to hold on control of the U.S. Senate, they need to flip the Pennsylvania seat. That is currently a Republican-held seat. Pat Toomey is retiring. And if Democrats are able to win that, then that puts pressure on Republicans. And then they have to win in Nevada and in Georgia to take control of the U.S. Senate. So to me, Pennsylvania is the whole ball game. But really, that shorthand, there are really 3 Senate seats to watch over the next few days. And that's going to be Nevada, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. And the party that wins 2 of those 3 will most likely end up controlling the U.S. Senate. And do remember, Georgia, if no one cracks 50%, goes to a runoff in December.
Yeah, which is what we saw before. I asked you your hottest take talking before the show. You said Pennsylvania, that's the one. There we go. We'll keep an eye on it. Joe just mentioned this. Maybe it'll be Thursday morning that we're still talking about this, still waiting on results. What do you anticipate? Because so many of these races are so tight in terms of when we will have answers. And also remind us what this has looked like in midterms past.
Yeah, I'm expecting a very long week ahead of us. And you should do the midterms last, the last presidential contest, we didn't find out until the Saturday after Election Day that Joe Biden had been projected to be the winner of that presidential contest. It has taken a while to count mail-in ballots. And some states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin don't allow you to start processing mail-in ballots until Election Day, which is why it sometimes takes a while to do it. But other states like Arizona has just notoriously been a very slow state to count. And even in in 2018 when Kirsten Sinema ended up winning that Senate contest and Joe Biden winning that in the presidential race. Those were, at the end of the day, 2 percentage point victories, but it took 3, 4, 5, 6 days to be able to count. And so the guidance that we've been kind of shouting from the mountaintops here at NBC News is like, it's election day, but let's get ready for election week as well.
Yeah,
all right.
Absolutely. In Nevada, I think they're already warning 10 days maybe. All right. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. As we said yesterday, we'll be seeing a lot of you. We really appreciate you being with us this morning. All right. Let's now go to Pennsylvania. Mark Murray's hottest take. NBC News correspondent Maura Barrett and Kate Whampoa, who's the government reporter for Spotlight Pennsylvania, are both there to report for us. Maura, I will begin with you. Good to see you with us. So 2 big races there. One for the Senate, so one we were just talking about between Oz and Fetterman, also one for governor. The big news today, though, let's start with this breaking news. Democrats are filing a lawsuit demanding that undated or incorrectly dated mail-in ballots actually be counted. Maura, explain to us how this lawsuit came to be and what Democrats are arguing.
Well, Savannah, back in 2020, we saw a plethora of lawsuits here in Pennsylvania, and we were expecting the same this year, but maybe not so soon. Democrats filing this suit last night, upset about the fact that these mail-in ballots might not be counted. To give you some context here, the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court had seen a challenge about these ballots, questions over whether counting undated or incorrectly dated ballots qualified as violating federal law. The Supreme Court was evenly divided on this, and so they told counties to set those ballots aside and not count them for now. Democrats and other civil rights groups like the ACLU are arguing that this could disenfranchise certain voter groups. And this is something that the state has encouraged counties to let voters know if they fall into that bucket of undated or incorrectly dated ballots, to give them the opportunity to come back, fix their mail-in ballot, make sure that it's counted come processing once Election Day closes here today. And so that's something you might be wondering, how many votes is that? It could be a couple thousand votes, but at the end of the day, this is very important for some campaigns like the Democrats, because Democrats lean towards those mail-in ballots. And just a reminder, in both 2016 and 2020, Pennsylvania came down to less than 1% of the voter population. So those that small fraction of mail-in ballots that are being set aside could really matter, Savannah.
Absolutely. Kate, let's bring you in here on the same topic, because I know you reported extensively last week about mail-in voting, what it ultimately means for counting ballots following the election. Now here we've got this lawsuit. As Maura just mentioned, we know Democrats tend to favor those mail-in votes. Explain to us where these ballots are coming from in the state of Pennsylvania and what this means in terms of how long it could take for this vote to be counted.
Yeah, by and large, they're coming from the 2 sort of big cities of Pennsylvania, either Allegheny County, which is where Pittsburgh is, or Philadelphia County, which is where Philly is. They're also sort of coming from the smaller regional cities like Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Erie, and the collar counties surrounding those 2 big cities.
Absolutely. Maura, all right, now let's get to the good stuff this morning. Polls are open in Pennsylvania. It's expected to be a close race, of course, on this Senate race. John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz. What can we expect from the candidates today, and what are you seeing as polls are open?
Well, voters were just let into the polling place behind me here in Montgomery County, but it is that Senate race that has kept all of us on the edge of our seats. You heard Mark Murray talking about how important this Pennsylvania Senate race is. Fetterman and Oz in a statistical dead heat when we look at polling. And so it really is going to come down to turnout here. And when I'm checking in with the campaigns, the Democrats are really focusing on and letting us know, we might see a Republican lead from the in-person voting, today, but they are really going to be waiting for that mail-in turnout. Now, in terms of last-minute activations, we saw campaigns across the state holding Get Out the Vote rallies to encourage voters to get out in person today. Text messages are flying to all Pennsylvania voters, both Fetterman and Oz, putting out their closing argument ads yesterday, as well as they're all over social media. Fetterman's expected to have his victory party over in Western Pennsylvania tonight, while Oz will be here in Montgomery County. We are waiting at the polling place where Democratic gubernatorial candidate Josh Shapiro is set to be voting in the next hour. So it is certain to be a busy day of voting, and we will continue watching to see how the results for this Senate race shake out, Savannah.
Yeah, Kate, let's talk about that particular voter and his race for governor. So polls show Democrat Josh Shapiro with a sizable lead over Republican Doug Mastriano. Let's talk about why this race has been closely watched in this state in particular. Now, we know governor races in general. I mean, it's important when you think about the certification of elections, which obviously has become quite a bit of conversation since since 2020. It's going to be a big storyline in terms of abortion in certain states. Walk us through this particular race in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I think you listed some of the biggest reasons. In 2020, Pennsylvania was a key state when certifying the election for Joe Biden. That's definitely a factor coming up on 2024. And again, abortion is a huge issue here and really has caused a huge spike in registration, especially in female voters in the state. And Mastriano and Shapiro are offering two extremely different views on that. Mastriano has said he would be okay with a total ban with no exception for rape, abortion, or the life of the mother, where Shapiro is definitely more of the centrist lane. He said he would protect abortion rights as they stand in Pennsylvania.
And Kate, is that right there one of the biggest sort of attack lines we've seen between the two of them in campaigns?
Oh, certainly. In both elections, both Senate and governor, you can see attack ads the world over about both Oz and Mastriano's lines on abortion just being repeated.
Kate, thank you so much. Maura, thank you so much. We are watching as Pennsylvania polls are now open on this election day.
And it's not just swing states like Pennsylvania that are seeing some contests that might be too close for comfort. President Biden actually spent part of Sunday in the Democratic stronghold of New York. Even though registered Democrats outnumber Republicans more than 2-1, the state's governor, Kathy Hochul, is facing a serious challenge from Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin. For more on this, we're joined by MSNBC anchor Lindsay Reiser, who's in Cold Spring, New York this morning. Lindsay, good to have you with us. So for a bit of context here, New York has not seen a Republican governor since George Pataki. That was nearly 2 decades ago. We know Republicans now really focusing on crime, the economy, to try and get through to voters. So is that what's behind this tight race between the two? Take us through how we got here.
Yeah, what a turn of events. Joe, good to be with you. It's about the issues that are mattering to voters. It's about the money that's being poured into some of these races. So let's focus on New York governor first. Kathy Hochul, Lee Zeldin. Kathy Hochul has been enjoying wide margins in this race until recently. In fact, in October, Quinnipiac poll only put her at 4 points above Zeldin. Her fundraising has been extraordinary, breaking a state record. She's pulled in nearly $49 million. But lately, Lee Zeldin has been getting a lot of help from Republican super PACs. He's endorsed by Trump, and his contributions of late have been just extraordinary. He's been hammering home on the airwaves crime, inflation. We do know crime numbers, even though felonies are down, homicides are down year to year. According to the NYPD, overall crime is up about 6%. That's mostly being driven by grand theft auto. And we know that a lot of people behind the scenes have been pushing Hochul to talk about what she's doing to reduce crime that people are feeling, especially in the city, talking about cameras on the subways, more law enforcement presence. But, Joe, as you mentioned, it would be an incredible turn of events here if that governor's mansion in Albany were to turn red, and certainly a race that's so close we're all going to be watching very closely today.
Yeah, and to be clear, Lindsay, it's not just Governor Hochul who's facing stiff competition in New York today. A top House Democrat is also locked in a very tight race of his own. Explain to us what's going on there.
Sean Patrick Maloney, he is right now the highest seated Democrat to be in a vulnerable seat. He was elected in 2012 to Congress. He's the head of the DCCC. He is in charge of that campaign arm, making sure that Democrats keep the House. But his own seat right now is vulnerable. New York Assemblyman Mike Lawler has proven to be a formidable opponent. At first, a lot of the fundraising that they were doing here was kind of considered a joke, but now it is really, he's really become a contender, again, focusing on crime, focusing on inflation, what people are spending at the grocery store. Sean Patrick Maloney has been talking about voting rights, reproductive rights, and he was on Meet the Press on Sunday with Chuck Todd, and he said he has to go out and fight every 2 years for this seat to earn it. It's not like in years past this has been a cakewalk for him, but this year there has been redistricting. He is introducing himself to a lot of constituents, and he'll be voting later today. We'll catch up with him, ask him a few questions, and also hopefully catch up with Lawler later today too, Joe.
I mean, so, Lindsay, just overall, what is it Democrats are saying about the fact that they are playing defense in what's historically a deep blue state? How much does that concern them?
So there's been a lot of talk behind the scenes of worries about, was there mixed messaging? Should they have focused earlier on inflation and crime as opposed to reproductive rights? Of course, when you ask people, again, Sean Patrick Maloney on Meet the Press saying, look, we don't know the results yet. We don't know if it's bad messaging or what's resonating with voters. But certainly, if you look at the fundraising, Joe, if you look at, you had mentioned President Biden coming here on that crucial weekend before the election to stump for Kathy Hochul and other Democrats here, it really shows how much these races are in play and the effects down ballot they could have as well. There are some competitive races in Long Island for Congress and also a New York Assembly Democrats in danger of losing their veto-proof supermajority this race, Joe.
Lindsay Reiser following some surprisingly close races in New York. Lindsay, thanks.
Now to battleground Georgia, where incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock is facing off against Republican challenger Herschel Walker in a fiercely competitive race. The latest polling data actually shows the candidates are neck and neck, and a record-breaking 2.5 million people have already voted early in the state of Georgia, which is where you find NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez. He's in Atlanta. Hey, Gabe, good morning. So this has become this incredibly tight race in recent weeks, and it has seen its fair share of drama. First, just tell us where we're at right now. We heard from both candidates. We saw them make their final campaign push last night. What did they say?
Yes, Savannah, both candidates searching for every last vote. And first, I want to take a live look, though, at the folks that have showed up to vote here. Polls opening just a short time ago, minutes ago, and a line started forming even before the polls opened. Several dozen people have been waiting in line. We just saw a few of them go inside right now, but still a small line outside of this polling place in Atlanta. Now, as you mentioned, this is a tight contest between football legend Herschel Walker, who was denied allegations during the campaign that he paid for 2 women's abortions, and he's tried to link incumbent Senator Raphael Warnock to President Biden and rising inflation. Now, Warnock, a minister, has slammed Walker as unfit for office and a pathological liar. And as you said, with control of the U.S. Senate hanging in the balance, more than $250 million has already poured into this race. And Savannah, there is a third-party candidate here, and in Georgia, if no candidate reaches that 50% threshold, that means that this all goes to a runoff next month. So this might not be over tonight or even this week, Savannah.
Yeah, we might be doing this all again in a matter of 4 weeks or so. Gabe, let's talk now, of course, about what's important here, what's ultimately going to make the decision, and that's the voters. What are you hearing from voters on the ground about this race in particular? There was so much question, so much speculation about if the allegations against Herschel Walker would change anyone's mind. What are some of the biggest issues and the biggest takeaways from that?
Well, certainly, Savannah, and there are several key demographics here, and the question will be which way these groups go in this election. Of course, suburban women, the youth voters, young people, who they will vote for, or whether they will turn out at all. I spoke with several folks on both sides of the aisle yesterday. Take a listen to what they had to say.
I believe in Herschel, and we need to get the economy back where it should be, and I think he'd make the best one. You go to the grocery store and you don't have, you just spend so much money in gas, and I just feel sorry for people that don't have money to make a living.
And you blame President Biden for that?
Oh, yes, I do, 100%.
Why are you supporting Senator Warnock?
I'm a Democrat, and first of all, his intelligence level is off the chart. And I think he's a good person to be in the Senate. You're always going to blame the person in power to get in power yourself. So Biden is doing a very good job working with the people around him for the United States of America. There's a lot of things happening in America right now. And it's not necessarily the economy here. Inflation is all around the globe.
So Republican voters, many of them telling me that their top issue this election cycle is the economy. Other Democrat voters that I spoke with said that it was reproductive rights, as well as threats to democracy that were really driving their vote. Again, voters here already going to the polls here in Georgia. The polls stay open until 7 p.m. Eastern time tonight.
Absolutely. Gabe, also, I mentioned the interest in this particular state in voting early and absentee voting, 2.5 million people voting early. I know also, though, now that the state has launched an investigation into absentee ballots that were not mailed to voters. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Savannah, another example of how every vote counts here, and especially in such a tight race. But Cobb County, which is a county, suburban Atlanta, essentially, the state has launched an investigation as to how more than 1,000 ballots were not mailed in time, basically. The ACLU had filed a lawsuit saying more than 1,000 ballots had not been mailed in time by mail to voters who had requested them. And several hundred of those voters ended up voting in person, but there were still several hundred others that did not get those ballots in a timely fashion. So there's some question about whether they will be able to get the ballots in by today. By the way, Savannah, Georgia is one of those states, and in some other parts of the country, you need to have your ballot postmarked by Election Day. Here it needs to be received by Election Day, and there was some concern that the ballots would not be able to be received. So now a judge has extended the deadline for those several hundred ballots in Cobb County, absentee ballots, to be counted until next week. But again, another example of just how much every vote counts in this especially tight race in Georgia.
Absolutely. One of the big three that we are watching, according to Mark Murray, and you will keep an eye on it for us. Gabe, thanks so much.
To Arizona we go, and if we're going to Arizona, that means we're going to NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. Two closely watched races there. So let's start, Vaughn, with the Senate race. You've got the Democratic Senator Mark Kelly, who just won a special election 2 years ago. His challenger is Blake Masters. They both made their final push to voters yesterday. What are their closing messages?
Yeah, good morning, you guys. This is major. I mean, if Blake Masters upsets Mark Kelly in this race, and we should know Blake Masters has consistently been down in polling ever since he won his August primary. If he wins, it could shift the balance of power in the U.S. Senate. I want to let you hear directly from both candidates, though, yesterday on the campaign trail.
And right now, we face some pretty serious challenges, like drought and rising costs. And my opponent, he's proven that he's not up to the task. And I think, frankly, Arizonans can't afford him or his dangerous beliefs in the United States Senate.
After just 20 months, our backs are against the wall here. We can't take much more of Biden-Harris. We can't take much more of Mark Kelly just rubber stamping their demented agenda. I really feel like this is a save the country election. Do you agree?
Masters is heavily focused on an economic pitch as well as border security. And Kelly there has talked about a myriad of issues, but he is also heavily focused on women's reproductive rights as well as the threats the Republican posed to the election process. This is a moment here where in a longtime conservative state, Democrats are trying to win a U.S. Senate seat for the third cycle in a row, which would be significant here, again, in this longtime conservative state.
So, Vaughn, you mentioned the election process. That might be the key issue in the governor's race, which is getting so much attention. Carrie Lake is one of many Republicans this election cycle who's echoed former President Trump's claims the 2020 election was rigged, which we know is false. But how is that resonating with voters?
Right. She has been at the forefront of this effort, propagating these 2020 election conspiracy theories. And she has made it a key part of her campaign, not only during her primary, but also just last night up on stage, previewing what she says is a reason for her to be worried about what was to come today. Take a listen to her last night.
And these back there don't want us talking about stolen elections. Well, it doesn't matter what they attempt tomorrow because we're going to show up like our lives depend on it. And there's not a darn thing that Katie Hobbs can screw up tomorrow to make our win any less significant.
Of course, this is the same Republican candidate who you'll recall in the primary suggested that there were signs of fraud and irregularities, but never provided any evidence of it, and then went quiet after she won that primary. And as you just heard last night, she's suggesting the same thing now, but again, providing no specific evidence or any specific allegations of actual fraud or rigging of this election.
And so, Vaughn, I quickly want to ask you about Maricopa County, because it's getting a lot of attention over misinformation surrounding midterms, increased threats to election workers, voter intimidation. Real quick, what's the county doing to try and ensure safety today?
Right. This was the county that was at the epicenter of the scrutiny, the audits, and the conspiracies of the 2020 election. We've seen voter intimidation at these ballot drop box locations. The Maricopa County Sheriff's just last night said that the office is not only setting up fencing and barbed wire around the tabulation center. This is the building where the ballots are being processed and counted, but they've also positioned deputies around this particular building because of the threats made against election workers.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard in Arizona. Vaughn, thank you so much. And stick with NBC News Now today. Be sure to tune in tonight for our special election night coverage starting at 6 p.m. Eastern with live results and analysis beginning then at 8. And, of course, we will have continuing coverage tomorrow morning right here on Morning News Now.
That is right. Now, this morning, we're tracking subtropical storm Nicole.
Meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us with that. Hey, Michelle, good morning.
Hey there, guys. Great to see you. Yeah, we're tracking the tropics. They are active right now. Subtropical storm Nicole is expected to strengthen into a tropical storm later today and could become a hurricane as it nears the northwestern parts of the Bahamas. So here is the latest on Nicole because we are looking at winds strengthened since the last advisories, 50 miles per hour. It's moving northwest at 8 miles per hour. The location is 380 miles east-northeast of the northwestern Bahamas, and that's where we expect to see the brunt of the storm later on tonight into Wednesday, and then later Wednesday impacting the state of Florida into Thursday. So we do have tropical alerts where you see the red. That is a hurricane warning. That is for most of the Bahamas, the northwestern parts of the Bahamas. We also have a tropical storm warning, but you can see Florida with tropical alerts as well into the coastal portions of Georgia. And we are talking major impacts as we go throughout the next couple of days. So here's the forecast track. We're looking at strong winds impacting Florida by tomorrow morning. Where you see this orange coloring, that is the tropical storm force wind. So it's well outside of the cone. And as we go throughout time here, you're going to see this track impacting portions of Florida as we go throughout tomorrow morning. And then we do expect landfall early Thursday morning as a Category 1 storm. That has been updated as well. So we will watch that very, very closely. We're expecting storm surge, very heavy rainfall, and some damaging winds that could cause some power outages. It's going to take a right-hand turn due to an area of high pressure off the coast, and it's going to go up the east coast. So we're going to see heavy rain impacting anywhere from the Carolinas into portions of the Northeast Friday and also Saturday. We could see up to 7 inches of rain. That's one of the major impacts, especially in portions of Florida where we're so heavily impacted by Ian. We're looking at more rain there, flooding of highways, poor drainage areas, and also some small streams could be impacted as well. Then as we go throughout time here, it moves to the northeast. We're looking at heavy downpours late Friday into Saturday. We're also talking about storm surge, guys. This is a big one. This is where we see that wall of water inland, and we're looking at 3 to 5 foot storm surge along the coast of Florida. Back to you.
Right, Michelle, thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle.
Sure.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.